Taylor Brorby is the author of Poison Oil, Growing Up Gay in a Fractured Land. He has also written Crude, a book of poems, Coming Alive, Action and Civil Disobedience, and is co-editor of Fractured, essays, poems, and stories on fracking in America. He's had numerous, so many grants and fellowships from a lot of different places.
Because writers are poor.
Taylor's work has appeared in the Huffington Post, Orion Magazine, the Arkansas International, Southern Humanities Review, North Dakota Quarterly, and has appeared in numerous anthologies. He regularly speaks around the country on issues related to economics, queerness, disability, and climate change. In his memoir, Brorby reflects on his upbringing, childhood memories, images of land, politics, portraits of bluegills and choke cherries, and oceans made of grasses. In one section he writes, "To grow up as a gay boy on the prairie is to live in a type of peril. For me, it always felt like I was swallowing the burning coal of who I was. With force and beauty and clarity, he captures the pain and dangers of growing up gay. His reverence and knowledge of the land made me slow down and look at my own world differently, to stop and watch dirt and grass and sky in a way that could carry meaning. I feel personally affected and so grateful for Brorby documenting his story and journey of self-discovery. I'm a better person and a better writer for having read his memoir. So please join me in welcoming Taylor Brorby."
Well, thank you for that. You can all hear me, right? I love this. It's like being the voice of God in these ways. You know, whoo. Well, it's so great to be here at BYU. I'm a fresh Utahn. I just moved here last August, and thank you for accommodating. The last time I was supposed to be here, I'd gotten in a car accident up in Salt Lake City, so I'm glad to be here this time, being able to share whatever we're going to talk about today and read to you a little bit from this book, though I don't really know what I'm up to in it. I'm not one of those writers who overplans or overthinks what he does. It's just all intuition. So we're going to go on our harbor cruise here to sort of give you some sense of, I think, what I'm up to. There's sort of two ways I think about my book. One is sort of through the lens of the natural world, whatever that means to you, and then really growing up in a rural space. I grew up in a town of 600 people. I went to school with the same 22 people. So there were 6 girls and 16 other boys in my class, mostly the entirety of my education. But I want to take you back. As much as I love the Wasatch, they're inferior to the prairie that I grew up on. So to begin my story, though I don't look like it, we're going to have to go 350 million years in the past. So let's begin at the beginning. It's a very good place to start. This section's called C. Can you still hear me? Or now maybe my mic isn't on. Anyway, I'll keep this here. Before it was an ocean of grasses, the prairie was a shallow sea. Salt water sloshed for millennia as rounded grains of quartz sand were swept from the dry land into the surf. When the quartz finally settled down into the beds, thousands of yards thick, trilobites, those bottom-feeding arthropods, crawled onto the large shelf of sand. Generation after generation of trilobites, a number stretching to near infinity, would die, covered by sediment, sludge, and mud. Weight and time then would transfigure the trilobites into a massive underground sea of gas and oil-rich rock. As the sediment settled, a large delta emerged: swamps, lagoons, meandering rivers, and vast forested floodplains. Trees expanding 12 feet in diameter and more than 100 feet tall grew like a prehistoric version of the Everglades. Plants growing in the swamps, lagoons, and marshes perished. They too were submerged underwater. Oxygen could not exist in the shallow bowls of plant debris. So the plants were broken down slowly but inexorably by anaerobic bacteria. but a thick layer of plant material did not fully decompose, and vast beds of peat accumulated. The surrounding streams changed course, and when they did, sprinkled sand and silt atop the peat. Layer upon layer, some more than 50 feet deep, weighed down the peat beds that, over time, transfigured into seams of lignite coal only a few feet thick. Volcanoes shot ash into the atmosphere. The ash floated on the airstreams. Ancient waterways flowing north and east carried silt and clay. Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, and other dinosaurs roamed the ancient verdant land. When a meteor struck what is now Mexico, the age of dinosaurs abruptly ceased, a blanket of dust and sand covering these creatures' thewy flesh. Ferns wilted and died. The weight of it all pressed the coal and oil down. Then came the great sheets of ice, miles thick, from the north. Boulders were picked up like tennis balls and dropped along the way. The middle of what would become the North American continent was bulldozed and reshaped into a vast open plain. Now, we're going to go on a little harbor cruise here to the least visited state in the country, which is my home state of North Dakota. I won't depress myself by asking how many of you have been there, but I'm sure you've been, if you've gone, to the bubbling metropolis of Center. And maybe it's like some places some of you have grown up or come from. We'll find out. Center is a place where people only end up. Sauked in south central North Dakota, located in the middle of Oliver County, Center is a stone's throw from the 100th meridian, the rod of aridity that cleaves America between the luscious greens of the east and the mottled browns of the west. My hometown is where great trapeziums of buttes begin to break against the wash of sky. It's the small county seat and the only incorporated town. Center is where farmers begin to get supplanted by ranchers. Fields flow into mines. It's where dust kicks up. Center is an ecotone, a transitory region of change. As the town motto reminds visitors, it's better in Center. There is no stoplight in Center, no grocery store. Such necessities as milk, hot stuffed pizza, and 2-liter bottles of Coke are purchased at the corner stop, the one gas station in the county. When I was small, growing up in a trailer house on the south side of Center, it took me all of 10 minutes to pedal my bicycle across town to Grandpa and Grandma Brorby's. I went to the one school in the county with the same 22 other students in my grade, a lopsided division of 6 girls and 16 other boys. There are 2 bars, a bank, a courthouse, and the small Cole Country Community Health Center on Center's main street. There are 3 churches, but not even a motel. As a child, though, my world didn't feel small. I played baseball and spent my afternoons with Grandpa Hudson-Buehler fishing for bluegills or picking tart chokecherries. I wandered the grassy banks of the small Square Butte Creek, a squiggly stream that eventually empties into the wide Missouri River, looking for muskrat, heron, or beaver. Sometimes I'd spot a coyote loping in the distance. The prairie I grew up on teaches you to notice, to pay attention. The yoke of the sun as it slides across the dome of sky, streaking the world orange and indigo, the swish of grass in the afternoon breeze, the screech of a grackle. During the golden hour on the prairie, the North Dakota palette reveals the subtle differences between ochre and umber and sienna. And North Dakota can also be biblical in terms of weather. Hailstones hurl from the sky, rain floods fields, tornadoes rip across the hills, blizzards kill cattle, heat chars crops. To the west of Center, a large dragline lumbers on as it breaks the soil, ripping lignite coal from underground. The men in center fill the pews on Sunday, and on Monday are back in the mine or at the power plant, digging in the ground, heaving coal into large boilers, sending electricity to eastern North Dakota and western Minnesota. The men call Oliver County God's country, a land filled with ringneck pheasants, deer, red-winged blackbirds. It's Eden, it's brimming, it's full of life. But each Monday and every day after, the men stumble into the two bars. Their suited hands grip cold beer, warm whiskey. Each year, North Dakota ranks first in binge drinking. High schoolers sneak bottles to hidden bonfires. Someone shoots off the road, is memorialized by a flowered wreath, and if they were nice, a crude wooden cross on a cottonwood tree on Highway 25 just before crossing the county line. Drinking is a way to numb the pain, the dissonance, the sound of the drag line, the rumble of the boiler, the blasphemy of the work that lies ahead. The story of North Dakota is then the story of self-destruction. Everything leaves North Dakota full and comes back empty. The only way I've understood my home is by getting out, escaping its crushing weight, watching the destruction now from the outside. In childhood, when I escaped to the hills with my tackle box and drawing paper, I told no friends. I kept it a secret, like a coal burning in my gut. Boys liked to play Smear the Queer, King of the Hill, and Cowboys and Indians. I played too to fit in, hurled my body against other small-boned bodies atop lumpy snow mounds. I was reminded by my father that Brorbys never tap out. But the prairie I escaped to was a supple whirlwind of grass tilting in the wind, a symphony of sage-grouse song. Beaver tails slapped the water. I would cast spoons for northern pike in the Square Butte Creek. When the casting became boring, I pulled out my sketchbook and pencils and traced the bend of the creek against the white paper. I tried to create the world I wanted rather than the world as it was. A world of broken lignite and all too often broken people. On the playground, I asked friends to play tag or an imaginary game of pirates. Instead, the other boys sized one another up, divided into two lines, and threw footballs. They ran back and forth across the asphalt playground, slammed the ball hard against the ground when they scored a touchdown. I watched from a distance, wondering where I fit into the place I lived. I still cringe when I say I played with girls, since I was constantly called a girl because I wanted to create my own games. I wanted room for my imagination. Throughout elementary school on Halloween, those boys dressed like police officers, firefighters, and football players. I dressed not as Barbie, but as Dracula or a wizard or a pirate. Even then, I wanted a larger world. My classmates played a preconceived game in a world that was preordained for them. Chase a ball under Friday night lights, grow into men who dig coal from the ground, save for the Mexican cruise you've always wanted, retire when your body begins to break. There's something I too craved in that landscape, something soft, something I couldn't see in the human-made world. So I headed for the hills where badgers roamed, where pheasants tucked into marshy grass. There was diversity to the natural world that I could not find in my hometown. He's a dreamer. He's not a hard worker. He doesn't want to play football. I now want to take you to meet someone who, unfortunately, you're going to think of as very cute and gentle. My grandmother, who was fierce, to put it mildly. And I hope you had a grandma like I did. I don't think you need any context clues here. It's a very short little section. One day, I sat at Grandma Brorby's vanity in Aunt Sheila's old room while Grandma fiddled with her pearls and asked, "Would you like to have some fun, honey?" I never said no to Grandma, the woman who peeled my apples and cut my bologna sandwiches into little triangles without the crust. She knew I didn't like crust. Grandma lifted me up and plopped me on her lap. She unscrewed the lid of a small vial. Her acrylic nails clicked against plastic. "Do you like how my nails look, Taylor?" "Oh, yes," I told her. "I liked them a lot." "Would you like your nails to look like mine?" I closed my eyes to think about it. We liked to keep each other in suspense. I opened my eyes and looked into the bright light of the vanity. Grandma rested her chin on my small shoulder, her curled brown hair tickling my ear. "Yes," I said. Grandma's white teeth glistened behind me. Her eyes glittered behind her large glasses. We sat, and she hummed as, stroke by stroke, my nails turned crimson, 1, 2, 3, until all 10 shined like bright little apples. And then Grandma held my hands, one by one, and blew. When Dad came to pick me up, I bounded up the green carpet like Daisy, my grandma's black dachshund. Dad saw me, and I stopped. I knew that look. His eyes flashed to Grandma. "Go back downstairs," he said, and I slid on my butt and bounced harder and harder on each step because I knew I had done something wrong. I went and sat in front of the vanity and stared into the mirror. "Mom, I have 1 son and 1 daughter, not 2 daughters," I heard him yell. Each word jolted me as I sat in my small chair. I held my cheeks with my fingers and then peeled the paint from my nails. Let's go to everybody's favorite time, shall we? Middle school. This will be the last section I read because it's rather intense, and then we can open it up for Q&A, and you can ask me anything you like. I'll tell you ahead of time, just so you know, I do not yet have a tattoo, but anything else is on the table that you would like to ask me, and I take that quite seriously. So here we are. I think we're good. I don't think you need any backstory up until this point. Cirrus clouds feathered the cerulean sky. I walked home a little after school had let out. I stayed late to practice music. In 8th grade, my band teacher, Mr. Rook, would write me notes to get out of study hall so that I could get away from classmates and play music. I stayed after school and practiced in the dinky practice room so that I didn't have to tiptoe around Dad as he slept before going in for work. I could wail and rock on my horn without worry. The practice room was next to the office and one of the school secretaries. Whenever I finished, packed up my saxophone, and closed the practice room door behind me, Mrs. Miller would crack her door and say, "It sounded even better than yesterday, Taylor." On this day, my saxophone bobbed up and down in its hard plastic case as I rounded the corner onto Prairie Avenue. I glanced to the west, past the stubble field and toward the weather farmhouse with its rusty weather vane, the place I sometimes still passed whenever I needed a break from reality of school to sink into the security of fishing for northern pike or watching red-tailed hawks circle high in the sky. I walked past Eric Johnson's house. Eric, who was in love with basketball and with whom I played on the team since 5th grade, had fallen in with Kai Martin, a pint-sized bully whose mission it was to mock me. Austin Berger, whose grandpa was a decades-long friend with my grandpa Hudson Bueller, filled out the trio. Throughout 8th grade, I had started to be called gay or faggot, but I didn't really know what those words meant. I knew it wasn't good to be gay or to be a faggot from how the boys said it. I didn't shut down so much as I tried to avoid. I asked teachers not to put me in groups with Kai, Eric, or Austin. Kai's stepdad, Walter, was the wrestling coach. Mark, my neighbor, stood up to Eric for me, but said he couldn't do anything about Kai since his stepdad had done so much for his coach on the wrestling team. I told Eric I'd take his Adidas shoes and shove those stripes sideways up his ass, Mark told me. Eric eventually left me alone for a while, but after cajoling from Kai and Austin, he joined back in. Throughout 8th grade, my mother drove me to Bismarck for saxophone lessons. At the power plant, one of her coworkers had recommended a local college student in Bismarck. He's certainly made Zach better at saxophone. Zach actually enjoys practicing now, Mom's coworker had said to her. When Mom asked Mr. Rook, he told her that private lessons could do more for me than anything he could do in band class. On some level, my parents must have known I was struggling to fit in, that I looked forward to going away each weekend to speech competitions. In hindsight, I'm not sure they could afford my saxophone lessons, but my mother drove me an hour each week to sit in her car for a half hour, whether it rained or snowed, while I tried to master the A-flat or F-sharp scales. When I got home from school that day, I slowly opened the door. I floated like dust to not risk waking Dad. With a quiet thud, I put down my saxophone and backpack. The house was still, the lights were off. The trees in the backyard had begun to bud, and the rooms inside the house were a matted glow. After a few minutes, I went downstairs to Dad's large safe in our hobby room, what Dad sometimes called our man cave. The safe didn't have a combination, only a large lever handle. He left it unlocked, so I didn't even need a key. Over the past year, I had taken up fly tying. Pheasant feathers, deer fur, small and large hooks were strewn on the forest green counter where I practiced making nymphs, caddisflies, and streamers. I pulled down the lever and swung open the safe door. Inside, in neat rows, lay our shotguns and rifles, my 20-gauge Winchester, which Dad had bought for me in 5th grade to take me pheasant hunting, rested at the front. I rubbed my hand along its sleek forearm. Earlier in the year, after I asked Mom and Dad if I could start taking lessons, they bought me an electric piano. I hope you have a better teacher than I did, Dad said. She used to hit me on the wrists with a ruler. I'd come home, turn the volume low, or if I sensed there was something in the air that might wake Dad, plug in my headphones to practice. I'd lay my fingers across the instrument's sleek plastic keys, adjust the volume, and practice my scales. In my own muffled world of music, I could pound out the pain I felt pulsing throughout my body. But music wasn't working anymore. Behind my shotgun were Dad's 12-gauge and deer rifles. Uncle Greg, my father's older brother, had left Dad his pistols when he had died a year earlier. I opened the black plastic case that held Uncle Greg's sleek black 9mm pistol. I checked the chamber and slipped a bullet in. I made sure the safety was on for a moment. I don't remember crying. I don't even remember feeling particularly sad as I came back upstairs. The kitchen was warm, the dining room still. I went over to my backpack. Each pull of the zipper sounded loud. I stopped to make sure Dad hadn't woken. I pulled out my yellow science notebook, opened it to a new page, and drew 2 columns. Reasons to live, reasons to die. I sat for a few minutes and began to fill each column. The process wasn't quick, but it wasn't ponderous either. I remember listing Mom, Dad, Tanya, and music under reasons to live. The only item I listed under reasons to die was because I am gay. Thank you. Well, I know how to teach, so I can cold call on you if you don't have questions. But I'll take any questions you have, writing, North Dakota, anything you want to ask is on the table. So yeah, please.
How has your experience as a gay man been different here in Utah versus growing up? And how has that influenced your life?
So the question is how it has my experience of being a gay man in Utah different from growing up gay in North Dakota, and then how has that influenced my life? Thank you for that. Well, the difference is I'm older and fatter than I was when I was growing up in North Dakota, for one. But I do think the older part is important because now I have agency. Like I can drive, for instance. Like I pay my own bills. Like these things are important because in some ways, if you feel like you're trapped, like I often felt, I didn't run away from home. My parents loved me. Worship sort of the ground I walked on. They didn't know I was gay until I was outed, which I write about in the book, much after college. And up until that point, they thought I could walk on water, even when it wasn't frozen. And Utah, I think, for me, I've hardly really been here. It's sort of a hard thing to answer. I mean, the good fortune is I've been so hectic with going around the country with this book that I've sort of been here for like 4-day stints, and my life is focused on teaching at the U. I teach an environmental humanities class there this semester. I love Utah. Utah is a complicated place, though. I mean, the day I moved to the state, the Alpine School District, the school board had put forth banning, I think the number was 52 books, 41% of which contained LGBTQ themes. And I thought, oh man, what a welcome present to the state of Utah, And I have friends who are Mormon and give me intel, and Terry Tempest Williams is a dear friend, has sort of been helping me think through certain things. I mean, part of what's been so cool to your question about Utah, never in my life did I imagine my sentences would bring me to Brigham Young. And that's what studying my sentences have done, and I take that seriously. So far Utah, for me, has been really lovely. I'm not a member of the dominant religious sect in the state, and so I think that would be a different experience. Of course, it would be if I were LDS, for instance, But I think part of just being in adulthood is, the Trevor Project, which documents the mental health landscape of queer youth in this country. They have this phrase they say, and I understand when you're younger why you need to hear it, it gets better. I think as I've gotten older, I've become more resilient and have found friends who are very supportive and people to lean on. So for me, it's not that it gets easier or better. I mean, we're living in a very dangerous time for queer people in this country with legislation. It's that I'm an adult now. I'm not 14 anymore. And that, thank God for that, honestly. Oh, for many reasons, yes. Puberty being one of them. What else is on your mind? Yes, please.
What advice do you have for facilitating productive discussion around LGBT experience and issues here in Utah, particularly, but also in general?
Did you all get what the sort of question is about? What advice would you have to facilitate questions, especially around queer material or LGBTQ themes and things like that? Well, there's a book for sale at $27.95 out front that you can buy and give to all your friends and family. But beyond mine, I really do take literature seriously. And this is why right now there's such a huge push to ban books such as mine around the country. I think a lot of the conversation around when you're gay, if you're gay like I am, I can't speak for being bisexual or other members of the queer community, it somehow comes down to always being about sex If I was having like as much sex as people talked about sex with these issues, my God, I'd be exhausted even more than I am right now, you know? And so part of it, I think, is what all books do. I mean, you know this. You read, you know, I read Toni Morrison. I'm not a black person. We read books to expand our perspective and to build empathy. We might not sympathize with characters or people, but most people I find are probably about 95% like me. They're trying to exercise, pay their bills, be kind, you know, things like this. I think getting access to stories helps people inhabit a way of understanding a life that it turns out is very similar to theirs. But because of the political structures and policies in place, they may have become targets and their life, in fact, might have become much harder. And so I think having book clubs is really important. I think really understanding that books are sort of curated in a certain way, more than TikTok, more than Instagram. I think even Instagram, which we would say is an image-based media, that's what Twitter is too, even though it's text. It's still an image. Images can reveal a part of a story, but literature is the story. You have to sit with something for several hundred pages. You know, it's why we still read Charles Dickens. An image gets a reaction from us, and then it passes, right? It's why we doom scroll, as they say. I really think that's the role of literature, especially now. Especially fiction is a great asset because it does a magic trick of, oh, that's just a character, but it might crack something open for people. So I think a good book club is definitely a way, and showing up. I mean, I think we have to learn how to be a little bit more uncomfortable these days if we've sort of had a limited perspective of the world. And I think providing people with material that gets them to move an inch, then you can maybe move them 2 inches, you know what I mean, and crack them open in that way. That would be my quick response to your question. So thank you for that. Yes?
How, being queer and also growing up in rural spaces, I find it really hard to hold those spaces with empathy all the time.
You got it.
So like, how did you do it in such a beautiful, tender way? And like, how did doing that did it change your relationships where you grew up?
I don't think, there are memoirs like this, so I'm just, you know, like a little Lutheran who tries to be really, really kind and stuff, even when people aren't. There are memoirs, as you know, that are more burn it down, and there's nothing wrong with that. Name another North Dakota writer. Right. So, yeah. So we have so few that part of when you're out there, it doesn't put you into a hole. I want people to stick with my book. And it's not that you can't take on tones of anger. My approach to this has been more give evidence. It's almost like I'm a lawyer. There's a scene in here the night I'm outed. I can remember that with total recall. It was very traumatic. I can't tell you quite how rooms look, but the lines of dialogue I still could recite to you right now. And part of that, it took me 10 years to write that scene to what's now in this book, because other times I was very angry. I was trying to get revenge in a different draft. I was trying to be too apologetic for my parents. And a good friend of mine, Pam Houston, whom you all should read, just said, Taylor, if readers believe you're trying to gild the lily or shape their perspective, you've lost them. And there are other important things in my book that I need you to understand, that the prairie is infinitely more beautiful than the Wasatch Mountains, for instance. You know, and so mine is more give evidence. And to be blunt to your question, I've gone to a lot of therapy. I mean, part of it is I go into rural spaces, I go to colleges and universities in rural spaces, because I know there might be a queer baby in the audience like I was, and they need a 35-year-old gay man to be brave in front of them, and to say, like, life is complicated and big and beautiful, and we need you around. I would have killed for such a thing in 8th grade, you know, and I take that very seriously. And so part of that, though, if I just seem like a bitter, I would love to curse a lot more today, but I'm minding my P's and Q's. If I was like a bitter little Lutheran, people shut off. You know, and my approach is like, I love the landscape. How has it bred a certain mentality of violence? Bitterness totally has its place. Anger has its place. I think as a writer, I continually ask myself, what is my objective? And it's to convince people who are convincible that they have to be brave. I think there is this middle spot of sort of margarine mindset people who need to be told, we need you as allies, and we need you to stand up. You know, when white straight people say, oh, I don't want to cause a ruckus, I'm like, do you think existing in this body is easy? I'm not even a person of color, and my life is difficult. You know, think of how many bars in the country, how many counties in the country I could go in and put my hand on my boyfriend's thigh, and that we would get out of. I mean, can't hold hands here at BYU. You know? So, I mean, this is why. There is, as you know, much work to do. And so that's part of why I'm a little ginger, I'm a little Viking, I love going into rage mode, but rage, I don't think, convinces people that we could be better than we are. So that's my goal. Yeah. Yes, please.
There was one line that I found particularly powerful. You said that you kept swallowing that coal, even though it hurt, hoping that one day you'd find that it turned into a diamond.
Yeah.
Do you feel like at this point in your life you've seen that day where that coal has turned into a diamond, and if so, how?
So there's a line, if you all didn't hear, and thank you, you must have read part of my book or found it somewhere, but that I write about, my whole family works in coal, oil, and natural gas. Coal paid for everything in my life growing up. And so I write about how I felt not being out yet, that I was swallowing a coal, hoping one day that it would turn into a diamond. I think my life's great right now. I mean, life's complicated, you know, things happen, like I, you know, have to grade papers and things like this, or I'm becoming a morning person. I used to be a night shift worker. I'd write till like 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning and be like, everyone's sleeping, look at how brilliant I am. And now I like roll over naturally at like 6 in the morning and go, what is happening to your life, Taylor, you know? But largely my life is great. I mean, the hard thing is, as much of my family has not been able to come along. This is one of the great myths we as Americans tell you, is that your parents will love you no matter what. If you feel your parents love you unconditionally, it must be because they continually choose to love you. There were definitive conditions to my parents' love, it turns out. One of them was being straight. I mean, again, I will say my parents were wonderful until they weren't. I was student body president in college. I'm the first in my family to finish college. My parents didn't know really what that meant, and then they drove down for this. Maybe at BYU you have these things called convocations that open the academic year, and the faculty, we all wear our, you know, gowns and look like our moms when they're curling their hair and process in. And so I got to give this lecture and march at the head of the faculty. And my parents drove a 1,000-mile round trip to hear me speak for 3 minutes. If that's not love, I don't know what is. But less than a year later, my aunt called my mother and said, I'm worried Taylor might be gay. And then everything upset the apple cart. I dropped out of seminary. I was going to Princeton, living a block away from where Einstein last lived. I thought, my God, my life this is incredible. The little boy who grew up in a trailer house is going to study at Princeton. And then I dropped out, and life got a lot more complicated. And so even in that complicatedness, it's not, there are moments later in the book, if you've read it, that echo that 8th grade scene that I just read to you all. It's not that I've become fully formed and then everything's hunky-dory and peaches and cream. I think I'm just so stubborn about wanting a good life. And part of that means that I've chosen family. My sister and nephews get to come along. One aunt of mine, one cousin of my 38 first cousins gets to come along. I just refuse to be abused. And so there are other people who need me in their lives and other ways of acting. And though there might be pain around that still, I have to keep going. So in many ways, though, at the end of the day, I would say, who doesn't want to be Taylor Brorby? I think I'm a riot. I think my life's wonderful. It's just poo-poo to people who can't be a little bit more open-minded and generous. And that's their baggage. It's not my job to convince them that I'm lovable. So, but ultimately the answer to your question is, oh yeah, I think I've got more than one diamond. So, yeah, thank you for that. Yes, please, and then we'll come over. Yep, go ahead.
So what would you say separates your poetry from your other prose, and when do you decide when you would prefer to use one over the other?
Yeah, what separates poetry from prose? Sorry, everyone, I'm a type 1 diabetic here. I'm pumping myself up. Don't worry, I'm not going to die on you. Poetry is such a sacred art. It's so old. It's in the Old Testament and even older. It's so hard as well. And this is really crass, but it's also true. There's just more money in prose at the end of the day, too, and more people read prose. So like that C section I read to you, the opening, the C, you heard a lot of S sounds or C sounds that sound like S's. That's called sibilance in poetry in particular. It evokes water in the sea, so there are techniques from poetry that I hijack to use in prose because I think, like Uncle John Steinbeck said, sentences should sing. That's my mission. Other people write sentences in different ways. Carver's short stories maybe aren't sentences that sing, but I want mine to, glisten and glimmer and shimmer for you. And so that's the realm of poetry. But part of it is right now I'm moving into novels. I mean, later you can all please offer up a prayer that my editor comes through. He's sitting on my first novel. He's had it for a month. I'm like, just buy the book already. Just say it. Yes. But I like the length of prose. It's not that poetry isn't difficult. I'm not saying longer is harder. There are just different conditions. And so what I've learned from poetry is trying to construct sentences where every word feels necessary and that it's inevitable. Every sentence in my mind should feel that the next one is inevitable. It's like a Beethoven symphony. And that takes a lot of revision. If you look at Beethoven's notes, he crossed out a lot as well. So I don't have a crystal ball. There was a period, I think I've always been building longer. Even this memoir is written in sort of shorter sections, almost what my buddies Joey and Patrick would call lyric essays in some ways. But you can create a prose book out of that, but I'm building towards writing a sustained novel like Charles Dickens. So I think for me, my focus has been writing longer. Yours, in fact, might be writing shorter or doing something differently. Does that get a little bit towards what you're asking? Thank you. Can I see? Yeah.
Do you have any tips? I feel like it's really important as a writer, and I mostly write fiction, to include a variety of viewpoints and of characters, who are queer characters of other races. But I struggle to know how far I can go because I really believe in the Own Voices movement and that I shouldn't take on those viewpoints that I don't have. Where is the middle ground?
Yeah.
How do you approach that without going too far?
I think you have friends who fit into, it's not to tokenize friends in this way. I have a buddy who's a white straight male who grew up what I call the butterfly wing of where I did, who's in eastern Montana. He's written a big novel and one of his characters is gay and he's not gay. And so he sent me the manuscript. You have what in some writing circles we call sensitivity readers. For me, I have not yet written about people of color. I haven't felt yet that even in my fiction, that hasn't been part of the pool I'm stepping into. I think it would be if you're thinking of those things about how do you write beyond your own demographic or whatever boxes we all now check. I mean, I personally believe you can write whatever you want to write. It's just, do you do it with sensitivity and research and that we're not feeding stereotypes as they've come to us. And part of that is reaching out to friends with different viewpoints and asking them to read your work. And they'll smell something that's rotten, and then part of the exchange of that, I think, is to then be open-minded to accept that. And to say, I don't sit around and think, like in my fiction, oh, I'm going to write a book about, with gay characters I don't try to predict the market. The great thing about, as your silence told me, there are no North Dakota writers anyone knows. So I'm trying to make the Great Plains a lot gayer, so I've got a huge bookshelf to fill, So I just feel like part of my thing is like, what's making me tick right now? But in the future, there might be a lot more racially diverse characters in my book. I hope so. For instance, black people have been in North Dakota as long as people who look like me. We need black writers from North Dakota on the national stage. I can't write a memoir about being black. I need to do a lot of work and research to understand more deeply what being black on the northern Great Plains might have been like during certain periods. So that would be it's the research part. And then just ask people to please read, and it doesn't have to all come from us as the writer. That's why we have friends, because writing can be really lonely. Does that help a little bit? I think we have about 1 minute left. Burning question. Yeah, please, in the back.
First, thank you for sharing your story and sharing it here. And then also a question, how did you decide, like telling this memoir to focus on your experiences with queer and then also the environmental aspect? Why would you
Yeah. Well, I'm lazy. Why put, being gay next to environmental stuff? I grew up in the shadow of a great smokestack of a power plant. I grew up swimming in a lake that never freezes. It turns out I'm a gay boy. Why can't you write about, it's flip, but that's what I'm saying. It's like a great essay. You put write an essay about like an outboard boat motor next to like a lemon. How are those related? I don't know, but through thinking and putting them next to each other, a third thing, what we call insight, happens. And so that's part of it for me. I think I'm just writing my life. And my life was, people who operate a drag line that ripped apart the planet, and I was a gay boy. And so in some ways it's just being lazy. And insofar as I know, no one else has done it yet, so I'm hoping other people do it. But that's really, I think, for me, first, it's not to be so narcissistic, but it's to say, what's my experience? What's a story I can tell? And I hope in a book like mine, it's as ordinary as anyone else's life. And our lives are literature. So I think it's worth exploring that. I'll stay around. I think there are anything else we need to check and my editor would say there are books for sale and would love for you to do that out someplace. But I will talk with you as long as you need. Thanks for having me at BYU.